Joel Embiid signs a 3-year, $193 million extension. My read on the way that this is going to work is they're going to rip up what is currently his player option on his third year remaining on his deal and tack on 3 seasons to the remaining 2 years that he has left. That's going to give him essentially a 5-year, $301 million contract remaining. Bryce, give me your take on this, because I think it's a interesting decision that they're probably backed into a corner in terms of having to make it, but there's downside, and it's a complicated discussion that I'd love to hear from you on.
Yeah, so I hate that I always kind of default to this answer where I'm like, what else were they going to do? We kind of had this conversation with Jamal Murray as well, right? Where the Nuggets, like, what were they going to do? Let Jamal Murray walk? Were they not going to pay him? I think this one, like, it's Joel Embiid. Like, you've built everything around this guy, and you have 2 other stars in place to play with him. So now are you not going to keep him around? This is his age 30 season. So we're talking 31, 32, 33, 34, age 34 season in that final year when it's going to be 70 million. That's a player option. It's 34% of the cap. I think what makes me nervous, Sam, is 3 years from now, when Paul George will be in his age 37 season, you're committing $120 million to Joel Embiid and Paul George. Now, Paul George's is a player option, but can't see why he wouldn't, exercise that option. It's just a lot of money. Like, you're very much locked into this trio. There could be worse things than being locked into Joel Embiid, Paul George, Tyrese Maxey. I just wonder if 2 years from now, we're going to be like, man, that's a lot of money to 2 guys that aren't playing a ton of games every year, that in Embiid's case, into his 30s, Paul George's case, getting into middle to latter 30s. It just makes me a little uncomfortable, but I guess those are tomorrow's problems, and you're not going to worry about it.
Well, yeah. So in Embiid's case, right, like Joel turned 30 in March, and he is now signed for an additional 5 years. Does anybody on planet Earth really think that Joel is going to be like playing MVP level, max level basketball at 35 years old? I think probably not, if we're being realistic about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But I think there's a chance that he probably is still okay at 33 years old. And if that is the case, you can't actually give him a contract. Like, you can't offer him 1 year.
Yeah.
Right. You can't just be like, oh yeah, we'll guarantee you're, another year on top of this. We'll tack on a full year. You can't, like, you have to max him at this point. He is the MVP of the league previously. He was phenomenal up until he got hurt last season. There's just not really a realistic scenario where Joel is like, oh yeah, like, I'm good tacking on 1 extra year. This is the time where he has the leverage to be able to go and get everything that he's capable of. Right?
Yeah.
But also, Joel has 2 years plus player option left on his deal coming into this extension. If you don't give him the money right now, or coming into the season, or throughout the season, whatever, you end up in a spot where he's then potentially entering next summer as an expiring contract. After you just signed Paul George, you have Tyrese Maxey, and you don't really have any cap flexibility moving forward because both of those guys are on max level contracts. So just functionally, they were kind of backed into this contract where it feels like they absolutely unequivocally had to do this. Unless you were deciding, you know what, we think Joel is not going to be very good for his age 32, 33 season, and we don't want to be tied to this core for 2 more years, after 2 more years. So maybe that was a calculus that was possible here, but that's a hard calculus at the end of the day.
Is that possible? Like, is there can we make that argument because I don't think you can with the Paul George contract. I think it makes it hard to do that when you just gave Paul George the deal you gave him. But if you take Paul George out of the equation, is there an argument to say just get the next 3 years out of Joel Embiid and then cut bait? Like just you get year 30, 31, 32. That would have given you what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 plus years of Joel Embiid. Just feel good about that and move on. Is there any argument to them having just done that?
I guess, but you still have Paul George locked in.
No, that's something like it take Paul George out of the equation. Like, I don't think you can do it once Paul's signed to this deal.
Yeah, but you also had to sign Paul to if you can get Paul George, you have to do that.
Agreed.
I think.
What
are you going to run back Tobias Harris? Or are you going to run back like a few other guys here? But Joel his injury situation is such that I feel like you have to always have like that third star there with him.
Yeah.
Because when Joel misses games, you need the second star to be able to play with Tyrese. So to me, it's very complicated. Their situation from a team building perspective is very difficult. That's why I think they had to do this at the end of the day. Like you just kind of have to go for it and say, well, we're probably not going to like this deal. And what would that be? 2027, 28 and 2028, 29.
Yeah, I think 27, 28 is the year, Sam. I think that's the year where it started to make me uncomfortable because you're age 37, Paul George on that player option, and Joel's a little older on 64 million. I think that's the year where this thing could be a little rough, but it's Paul George on an expiring. Embiid has 1 year plus a player option. Maybe you just have to survive a year if they have deteriorated the way we think is possible. And I think it's fair to think that's possible with both of these guys when we're talking about 3 years from now.
Yeah. So like the option is just not doing it. And, saying to Joel, hey, like you have what was it? It was like, it was something like wild in terms of what the number was. It might've been like 50, 58, 59 that was due to him, something in
on
that
the player option.
On the player option. Yeah. Like something in that
Yeah.
ballpark. So you could have just said to him like, hey, turn that down if you want to. But I think somebody probably would have paid him for 2 years in that season. And thus like they probably would have had to try and pay him. I don't know. This one's complicated. I don't have at the end of the day, I don't have an issue with them doing this because you're signing a guy that is 30 years old, who is coming off of like MVP caliber play at the very least. Maybe he didn't win MVP last year, but he was looking like a potential MVP candidate before he got hurt. And you've built this entire thing around him. You've made this decision to build this thing around Joel and Tyrese and Paul. I think you have to pay him. I think that's the corner you've backed yourself into at this point, and you've set it up to where it's a decision that just kind of has to be made.
I think this will be a really interesting test case in team building under the new CBA and all that. Those 3 guys are going to take up over 90% of the cap for the next few years. And so it's a trio that I don't think you can find a better trio in the NBA, at least right now. Proven, I guess. But can you build around the margins? Can you win on the margins whenever you have 3 guys taking up that much cap space? I think it'll be a really interesting test case.
Yeah, even in 2027, 28, those guys are taking up like 88.6% of the cap, right? This is like the antithesis of the way that a team like Denver is building around Nikola Jokic, right?
Yep.
Philly is just like throwing money at the problem, right? Denver is trying to get cheaper, trying to get a little bit more flexible at the end of the day. So I'm interested to see how all of the different team building ideas come together in the time of the second apron being as difficult as it is to navigate, and in this new collective bargaining environment where team building is obviously going to get more complicated for everybody.
And I mean, the Celtics are going to find themselves in this situation as well in 25, 26. Their top 3 guys are going to be over 90. That'll be Jalen, Jason, and Drew. that year. And then obviously they have KP and Derek White as well. So we're going to see a few teams go through. Obviously, the Suns are beyond even what the Sixers are with theirs, but it will just be interesting. Can you do it with three guys making this level of money? How will other teams navigate that? You kind of shocked me a couple weeks ago when you brought up the Thunder and how eventually over the next few years they're going to find themselves in this situation. Like they may have to watch, okay, how are the Sixers? They're in a completely different situation though, with draft picks and young players and the mechanisms to build out their roster. But it will just be interesting as teams have these level of players. Can they do it with three guys making 90+% of the cap?
So there's just a small difference though between Oklahoma City and between Philly, right? So the Philly side, Paul George and Joel Embiid alone will be making, in 2026, 27, 67%
Yeah,
of the
that's
cap.
true. Yeah, Chet and J-Dub won't be on. They'll still be on the rookie max. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, unless one of them makes All NBA, at what point they will jump to 30%. But they have 2 years to make All NBA, right? And I think it's possible. Like I actually think either of them could do it. If I'm being completely honest, maybe not. Honestly, this year I guess is like low degree of likelihood, but plausible. Next year I think is like very doable potentially for those two. And I'm sure that the Thunder will put the language in their contracts to say you get the jump up to 30% because those guys have earned it. But even then, even if they both end up in that circumstance where they both make All NBA along with Shea, which feels very unlikely, at that point, like Shea is still at 35, and then those guys are at 30 and 30 each. I guess that then they'd be at 95% of the cap for three guys, and the Sixers would be at 90 that season. So that would be like fairly close, but that's just like very unlikely to me. And the antithesis of that is that you have Shea, who you're hoping to keep at 30 to 35% of the max or of the salary cap. I'm sorry, and then hopefully you have these other two guys at 25%.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So they don't quite hit the same thresholds. That's true. Yep.
Totally. So it'd be like 85% for three guys.
Yep.
At the start of their deals, and that's before the cap rises and continues to rise. So that percentage goes down and down and down. Yep. So the Thunder are potentially in a slightly better position, but they're potentially in a slightly worse position. The difference, though, again, between where the Thunder and the 76ers are is that those guys are all in their early 20s or early to mid 20s in Shea's case, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Maxi's 24, I believe.
Yep.
24, 23 maybe. And then the other two guys are 30 years old and 34 years old, 35 maybe even in Paul's case. So it's a harder like situation to navigate in terms of like age gaps, in terms of figuring out who's going to be your best players moving forward.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's definitely not 1-to-1. I was trying to think of teams who might fall into that, three different players making that level of the cap. So
yeah, I mean, it's there's a reason that a lot of teams aren't doing it. It's because it's very difficult to deal with on the salary cap front. I mean, Boston is the obvious example. Like Boston has both Jalen and Jason locked in at 33 and 32% of the cap, and then they have Drew Holiday is theoretically locked in right now at 20%, and like we'll see how long he's on Boston, right? But that's 3 years away. In 3 years, Boston has Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Drew Holiday locked in at, I think it's like 88, 89% of the cap. So very similar to what Philadelphia has.
Yep.
So there are teams that are doing it. It's just complicated. And then on top of it, Boston also has Derek White at 18%. So that's another, they're up over 105, 110 for four guys. Yep. Okay. Anything else on Joel? I mean, I feel like we just kind of shit on this deal a little bit for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but
I don't.
At the end of the day, like Joel's a great player.
Yeah.
And it's just all about, we need to see Joel get to a playoff run like fully healthy. and hopefully Paul George helps them be able to do that. But that's what it comes down to for me is, can Philly get Paul George, can Philly get Joel Embiid to the start of a playoff run completely healthy? And until we see that, it's tricky to build around Joel, I think.
Yeah, I think maybe in the way we should on it was we didn't give it the positivity of how good he is and this trio and all of that. I mean, we talked about how good the trio is, I guess. So we gave it some love there. It was more so just like all contracts have a chance of aging poorly, right? They all do. But if you look
Mhm.
3 years from now at the Sixers books, at the very top at least, there's a chance that you have a 37, 38-year-old Paul George, a 33, 34-year-old Joel Embiid who has proven to have injuries. That's a 7-foot big man. Like, there's a chance that I think it's fair for us to discuss that could look not great 3 years from now. Does that mean you don't do it? No, but it's just saying that for a 3-year run and chance to add a title over the next 3 years, which you would take, you may have 1 or 2 years on the back end that are a little bit rough, or you're trying to get off a contract or something like that because of that. Would you make that trade? Yes. If you get a 3-year title window with this big three, you take it, even if it means maybe a year or so that's not great on the back end. So,
Yeah, and in this case with Joel, obviously as well, the question is with Joel, Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, all these guys, how open is the title window? I'm not saying it's
yeah.
not open. It's just we don't know yet how open the title window is because these guys haven't played together. This is
Yeah.
like an entirely new team that they've built around them. It might be like wide open. Like it might be like we find that Tyrese Maxey is taking a leap into like the Damian Lillard zone, and Paul George is still going to be Paul George for 2 or 3 more years, and Joel is Joel. And they really have a shot to win like 58 games this year and be like strongly in the title mix. That is possible for the Sixers. I don't want to slight that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just that there's ups and downs with
The
it
other
all,
thing, I
right?
guess you can look at this two different ways. The books are also very clean outside of those two guys, or three guys, excuse me. Caleb Martin did get a 4-year deal with a player option on the end, but those are the only guys you have on the books 26, 27, 27, 28, outside of the guys they drafted in Jared McCain, Adem Bona, Ricky Council a couple years ago. So, like, the books are very open where, if you did get in a situation where Paul George, has 1 year left, he's an expiring deal, you need to get off that contract. Like, there's probably a way to get off that expiring deal and build out your roster around, with somebody else, with Joel and Maxey or whatever. So the books are clean outside of those guys.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a good point. Look, Joel's an unbelievable player. We
Yes.
just want Joel to be healthy. Hopefully, the addition of Paul George, Caleb Martin, the continued growth of Tyrese Maxey allows him to get to the point where he can get through a regular season. Maybe it allows him to play 65 games of full health this year. Maybe it allows him to play 50 games throughout the season, and they're able to get through to the playoffs at like the 4 seed or the 3 seed or whatever, and just be able to run, right? And just be able to go at that point. But this contract has more downside risk than most of these deals that are signed, given that you're signing a large 7-foot human being to 3 additional years into his mid 30s, when this large 7-foot human being has also dealt with injuries in his past.
Yeah, and I think Tyrese Maxey is huge for that team, because if he can really lead the charge in the regular season,
Totally.
that would be huge for Paul George and Joel Embiid in this team. And then I'm so sorry. That was a really big sneeze, and I didn't want to do it into the mic,
I
Sam.
love it.
I apologize. So if you're listening on audio, that's what was the break there. So, but that he's huge for them in the regular season. And I want these guys, this East could be so much fun, Sam, with this reigning champion Boston Celtics team, this Knicks team that brought in Mikal Bridges. If the Bucks figure it out and then the Sixers team comes together, that's 4 teams that could be a lot of fun competing against each other in the play. And I didn't even mention the Pacers. It would make that conference so competitive.
Yep. So our take overall is A deal that is not without downside, but one that probably had to be made.